Welcome back to Mastering Your Money. Joining us today is Dana Anspa, About.com's Money Over 55 expert. There is what we call the retirement red zone out there. 10 years before we retire, 10 years and after. Dana, tell us how that works and how does it apply to people in as far as making mistakes?
Well, I've often called retirement this process of making a series of irrevocable decisions. And as you get within that window of 10 years before and the first 10 years of a retirement, the decisions you make are more important than ever. And what you really need to focus on are the things that you do have control over instead of all the things outside of your control. For example, a lot of people talk about the market or the economy or what is the Fed going to do with interest rates or what mutual fund should I be buying. And those decisions, you don't have control over the Fed or the market or interest rates. And regarding what mutual fund you buy, that decision has very little importance on your actual outcome in retirement.
So when it does come to the retirement red zone, such as the 10 years before, why is it so crucial that you don't make an irreversible mistake or an irrevocable mistake? I mean, what can happen if too many things go wrong?
Well, what can happen is you'll have a lifestyle that's not nearly what you had expected. Some of the irrevocable or irreversible decisions are things like, when do you start your Social Security benefits?
Okay.
When do you actually, how do you go about selecting your options? And if you're married, do you choose a benefit that provides for your spouse or do you choose the single life option? Most of the time, once you make those decisions, specifically with Social Security, after 12 months, you can't change your mind. It's a permanent decision.
You know, Social Security is a very hot topic. And people are looking at, okay, when do I turn it on? There's over 567 ways you can turn on your Social Security benefits, depending if you're married or not. And within that range, and you were talking like probably within the first 10 years, how do you know what plan to choose if you're married or not married and not make that irreversible mistake? Because life does not allow do-overs in retirement.
No, it doesn't. I think the best way is you actually use an analytical process and you crunch the numbers. So if you're married, you look at it as a household decision over our joint lives. What choices are going to give us the most lifetime income? And if you're single, you're still going to look at it that way. What choice is going to give me the most lifetime income? What I see people do is they make the choice that's going to give them the most cash today. So, for example, if I told you or asked you, which would you rather have, $1 million today or a penny doubled every year or every day for 30 days? You might know the right answer, but a lot of people go, I'll take the $1 million.
Give me the cash. Give
me the cash. And you'd be leaving a lot of money on the table. A penny doubled every day for 30 days equals over $5 million.
So if we were to double, a penny's worth 2 pennies in day 2, and day 3 it'd be worth 4 pennies. You got that compounding of doubling effect, then it could be 5 million versus 1. So it's almost being like penny wise but dollar foolish.
Exactly. And that's exactly what people do when they make some of their irreversible retirement decisions, is they go, oh, this is going to give me cash today. But what they need to do is step back and look at it over their lifetime. By making a quick decision and not using an analytical process, they're often leaving a lot of money on the table.
So I know I look at this sometimes, and I get my Social Security statement, and I see 3 numbers. Okay, what am I going to get at 62? What am I going to get at full retirement age? And then what am I going to get at age 70? And then what do people do? They just make their decisions based on that alone, and what's going to give me the highest paycheck. But what you're saying is, if you're married, it can make a big irreversible decision for one of the spouses.
It can. So, what a lot of people do is they look at their statement, they collect benefits at 62. If they keep working, they don't realize that there's a period of time before they reach their full retirement age where they may have to give some of those benefits back. Another mistake people make if they're married, they don't look at the survivor benefit that can be there available for a spouse that might live quite a bit longer than they do. And so they make the decision as an individual rather than looking at it as a couple. Another mistake people make, you mentioned this concept called full retirement age. So if you were born January 2nd, 1943 through January 1st, 1954, that your full retirement age is age 66. If you begin benefits before that, that's going to take some of your claiming choices off the table, such as the ability to claim on your spouse's record first and then later claim on your own record. So if you're not aware that you're making a decision that's going to later eliminate some other choices, you really need to be aware of those things before you make those permanent decisions.
So you're saying a lot of people are making decisions on Social Security as individuals instead of as a household. And then that household benefit could be a big difference for the surviving spouse.
Yeah, it can. So, women live longer than men. We all know that. Women are more likely to be single later in life. So the statistics are, if you look at people age 85 and older, 60% of men are married, but only 15% of women age 85 and older are married. So we're very likely to be single later in life, even if we're married today. And Social Security provides inflation-adjusted income. For a lot of women who are of retirement age today, they didn't work, they spent many years taking care of children, and the majority of their Social Security benefit is going to come from their husband's benefit.
I see. So because the husband, in general, has worked a lot longer or made more money, their Social Security benefits could be higher. But if they're not planning their income in retirement as a household, then that could be a big penalty for her down the road if something happens to him, and it's more likely that she'll live longer.
Correct. Yep, that's exactly right.
So what happens when you talk to a husband and he wants to be selfish and says, forget her, I want more money in my pocket today?
I'd tell the wife to get divorced.
Well, there's other sources of income, right? There's Social Security, which is one of the greatest assets Americans have today that seems to be underutilized. But a lot of people are offered pensions. How does that work as far as making an irreversible mistake?
Well, you can collect a lump sum. Many pensions allow you the ability to take a lump sum or to take it over your lifetime in the form of an annuity.
Okay.
Pensions will allow you the option to provide an ongoing income for your spouse or to take a single life-only option. If you're married and you choose the single life-only option, then you could be eliminating a huge source of income for your spouse. Many people, when they look at the lump sum versus taking a monthly income, will choose the lump sum because they think they can do better in the market.
Interesting.
Yeah, and if you actually run the numbers, some pensions are providing you a great rate of return if you wanted to look at it that way.
And I think that's key what you're saying. So some employers say, okay, you get money for life because you work for a company, and that's your only option. But some employers say, actually, take this money. We don't want that liability, those legacy costs, and it's up to you to build your own type of income stream. And what you're saying is sometimes it's to your best interest to leave the money and take the money for life. But don't forget about the household.
Correct. If you're married, don't forget about your spouse and how your choice might affect them later in life.
Okay. So we got Social Security, and it's important to optimize. There's pension benefits from an employer if you're eligible for that. What about if you have retirement savings, 401ks, IRAs, and you say, I depend on this money, I need to live on this money? What are some major mistakes people make today, and how do you minimize that?
I think one of the biggest mistakes is relying on what I call average returns. So if we were to look at the stock market, the S&P 500 for the last 30 years, it averaged about 11% a year.
It's pretty good.
Pretty good. But average means that 50% of the time you did better and 50% of the time you did worse. There's a retirement researcher named Wade Pfau who's looked at this, and he's come to the conclusion that you have about a 1/3 probability that in retirement your compounded rate of return will be 6% or less.
Okay, and that's just based on S&P maybe, or is that based upon underperformance and fees and taxes?
It's based on something called the sequence of returns,
Okay.
or what period of time did you get in retirement. So if we look back in modern U.S. history, one of the best times you could have retired was 1966. Actually, that was one of the worst times you could have retired. It was the worst, was 1966. The best was 1982. So if I retired in 1966 and I had 60% of my money in stocks and 40% in bonds, I ran out of money in about 30 years.
Wow.
If I did the exact same thing, invested the same way, drew the same amount out, but I was lucky enough to retire in 1982, right before we got really good stock market returns, then my money quadrupled over that time frame. So that's one of those things we have no control over. What period of time do we get? Do we get the best 20 years in economic history, or do we happen to retire into the worst period of time? When you use an average in your retirement plan, it doesn't factor all of that in.
So Dana, what you're saying is we got to be kind of careful about averages. Like my sister and I were both runners, and we averaged maybe 20 miles a week. But the reality of it is she runs about 40 and I don't run at all. So if you're at the wrong day, and we don't know what day that's going to be, it can change your lifestyle if you don't do your planning properly.
Yeah, if you don't do your planning properly. So what you can do is stress test your plan.
Okay.
Think of the bank stress tests.
Yeah.
You want to test it over, what if I get a really bad time in market or economic history? Does my plan still work? And if it does, you can feel pretty confident in it.
What's an example of a stress test?
There's something called a Monte Carlo simulation. So it simulates the results over a random pattern of returns. There's some online calculators that will do that for you. A qualified financial planner can help you with that type of analysis also.
So for example, I don't know, if oil goes down to $20 a barrel, or if interest rates go up by 5% over the next few years, what would happen potentially to that portfolio, and how would that affect your income down the road?
Well, no one knows exactly. That's the idea of a stress test, is to say, let's put all these variables together, and if I were to get a really bad outcome, what are the decisions I could make? What adjustments would I need to make?
That makes sense. So there's things that are in your control, and then there's things that are outside of our control. Yep. Can you talk a little bit about the difference of the two, and then what can we focus on that is within our control in retirement, red zone?
Yeah, the things within our control, how much we spend.
Okay.
To some degree, the retirement date that we choose. Sometimes outside factors force us into retirement earlier than expected.
Right.
But to some degree, we have some choice over that. The amount of risk that we take in our retirement portfolio is something that's within our control. Some of the things outside of our control, the market, what returns we get, what's inflation going to be, we don't really know. The economy, unemployment, all of those things we have no control over. So we really want to focus on, our spending habits. When we're accumulating, one of the most important decisions you can make is simply how much should you save?
So specifically, if there's a good idea of what to focus on, and then a bad idea of making your decisions of what to buy and things of that nature, what's the most important in this, like 10 years before and 10 years after, this retirement red zone?
Well, the most important is all the things you have control over.
Okay. How
much should I save?
When to turn on Social Security?
When to turn on Social Security. Once retired, how much do I withdraw, and do I have a plan in place to monitor that? So I think of it, I live in Phoenix. If I were flying from Phoenix to Des Moines, where my parents are, most of the time that I'm on that plane, it's not actually on course. It's a constant series of course corrections. So
you're checking in as you go through that journey of retirement, which means, but if you don't do that, you could be way off course and end up in Alaska somewhere.
Yes, exactly. Got
it. Well, good. So now, is there a difference in planning for households, versus if you're single?
Yeah, certainly. If I think of a married couple, one of the mistakes I see them make is they still look at some of the decisions as individuals. So you might have one half who says, I'm going to take a lot of risk in my investments, and the other half says,
that's usually the guy, right?
Usually it is. The other half says, I'm going to be really conservative. You might have both halves making decisions about when to start Social Security independently, instead of looking at it jointly. They should really look at this pool of resources, all of their assets, as a household, and say, okay, how do I make all of this work together to accomplish the most after-tax income for us in retirement?
So it's about the net. It's about the net spendable, and being tax-wise and not making those mistakes.
Yeah.
So in saying that, what would the difference between, so you're making a plan if you're married, and now you're trying to optimize for a household. How's those plans change if you become single again at some point?
Well, it depends to some degree on how you become single. So if I think of somebody who's already single, they're looking at, the decisions individually. And I focus on women in particular because naturally I'm a woman. And when I look at some of the decisions that women make, we spend on average 12 years less in the workforce than men do. And that's often because of caretaking roles, not just staying home with children, but it can be parents or in-laws or grandchildren. Women often leave the workforce to care for others. That means they have less Social Security, they have less pensions.
Wow.
They really need to focus on how do I maximize those guaranteed sources of income.
And how would the woman do that? I mean, what are some ideas that even if you're married, it seems like you still have to have an individual plan if you were single at one point.
Yeah, you do. So, one, it's around maximizing Social Security. So a lot of women were married. If you were married for at least 10 years, you can actually collect on an ex-spouse's Social Security benefit, either a living ex-spouse or a deceased ex-spouse.
So if you were married and you haven't been married for 10 years, or you were married for 10 years, you can collect on the ex's Social Security benefits if it's high.
Well, you can collect on it, and whether it was high or not, you have to do an analysis to see, would it make sense for me to collect a benefit based on their record, and then perhaps later switch over to a benefit based on my own earnings record. Or sometimes, for some people, it makes sense to make the decision in the opposite order. They might collect on their own benefit first, and then switch over and collect on an ex's benefit. One of the key things is that does not affect what the ex gets, or if the ex has remarried, it doesn't affect what their current spouse might get. It has no effect on them at all.
So the ex doesn't have to approve or disapprove. They can go into Social Security and say, okay, here's the option I want. But to looking at those options that benefit him or her the most, it can make a really big difference, especially when Social Security can have increasing income with COLA.
It can. Sometimes it can provide, $1,000 or more a month in retirement. That's a big difference.
That's a big number, especially if it's an increasing number.
Yep.
And then how would you plan if you're just differently if you're now a single male versus married?
Well, one of the factors as a single male, you have a shorter than average, or not shorter than average, but a shorter life expectancy than compared to women. And so you might look at your individual Social Security decision as a break-even analysis.
Okay.
So you might plug the numbers in and say, okay, well, regardless of what age I collect, maybe your break-even age is around age 82. And if my health history indicates I'll probably live longer than that, maybe it would make sense for me to delay start Social Security. If I have health issues that mean perhaps I might not make it that long, I might start earlier.
And I hear this all the time. It's like, I'm not going to live that long. I better rush in and collect my Social Security benefits. But a lot of times that can be solved pretty easily just by showing, okay, if you're going to die, if you really think you're going to die less than 9 years from now, then maybe you should turn it on. But if you think you're going to live 9 years or longer, whatever that break-even point is, that's how you make your decisions with confidence.
Yeah, if you're single.
If you're single.
If you're single. That decision or that analysis you just talked about does not apply when couples collect, and so you have to make that distinguishment.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Dana. Covered, you can't afford to make irreversible decisions in this retirement red zone, the 10 years before, then 10 years after. It's important to make sure you look at the sequence of returns, because if you do retire at the wrong day, it can make a big difference in your life. And then lastly, look at plans as a household, and also look at plans as an individual, as plan A, B, and C. So thank you for joining us today. A lot of wisdom what you said, and we'll be right back.